no known extraordinary items. Though I would like to move to the Chief Executive and the Group Financial Officer report an update on where we've got to on that plus CCO partnerships, particularly in light of the current concerns about, for those who haven't read the paper today, but the cost of debt has risen dramatically overnight, and we have been generous with accumulating debt. So I don't imagine we're going to get particularly happy news. It's over to you, Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could, thank you, councillors. This is the first of what will be monthly Chief Executive and Chief Financial Officer updates to the governing body. Financial performance reports for October 2022 are attached to this report for the Auckland Council Group, as well as individual entity reports for Auckland Council Parent, each of the CCOs and the Port. The governing body will also receive full quarterly financial and service performance reports, the first of which will be the Quarter 1 report on the 15th of December at the governing body meeting then. Peter Gudsall, Group CFO, will provide more detail on financials shortly, and of course each month from a CE report perspective I'll generally cover a number of topical areas. This month I'll cover the government reform program, people and workforce, and financial and service performance. Given the OCR announcements yesterday that the Mayor referred to, we will focus more on the financial update today. Firstly, let me make some comments in relation to the government reform program, which continues to be an area of focus for us. I want to update on 3 current areas of reform where bills or reports have been or are about to be released. Firstly, the resource management reform. The government's introduced 2 bills as part of the resource management reform to replace the existing Resource Management Act. First of those is the Spatial Planning Bill, proposes 14 new regional plan areas across Auckland, across the country, to set out future direction in that region. Auckland will be one of those its own region of the 14. And then the second part of that is the Natural and Built Environment Bill, which focuses on outcomes rather than effects and puts in place all of the general provisions and processes for resource management. The Environment and Select Committee will consider the bills and call for submissions and hearings, and we will prepare through the Chief Planning Officer in my team a response to government submission from across the group as guided by elected members. We'll report back when the submission period is known and work with local boards and the Planning, Environment and Parks Committee on Council's submission. In relation to the Future for Local Government review, the work on the Future for Local Government has been underway for the last 18 months, and the report, draft report into the Future for Local Government was released in October. With the release of the draft report, the panel are underway in a series of local government, mana whenua and stakeholder engagements across the country. Auckland's governing body and local board sessions are scheduled for the 5th and 6th of December. Submissions on the draft report close on the 28th of February and will inform the panel's final report due to be reported to government in June 2023. Once again, our team will support the Council's submission as guided by governing body and local board feedback. And the third piece of government reform is the Water Services Entity Bill. The Finance and Expenditure Select Committee recently reported back to Parliament on the Water Services Entity Bill. One of the many of Council's key submission points that were made to the committee in July 2022 were not reflected in the Select Committee's recommendations. It is expected that the bill will pass into law and gain royal assent in December of this year. There is further legislation that will follow the bill with more detailed implementation arrangements, powers and functions and economic regulation and consumer protection regimes. Memoranda on these 3 areas of government reform were circulated to elected members recently. Our team will continue to provide support to elected members as required and are available to take questions if necessary. Secondly, I want to turn to people and workforce. Workforce costs, given the current financial outlook, we've put in place additional management tools around recruitment. They were implemented in October. The principle we're adopting here, of course, is that frontline roles we are replacing, frontline and customer-facing roles we're replacing, while any other roles, support roles or management roles, are coming under much more significant scrutiny and review. We're tracking 2% below year-to-date budget for employee benefits overall, but we will see, of course, seasonal fluctuations of FTE as we bring on temporary summer park rangers for more remote and busy regional parks and lifeguards for outdoor pools which are opening shortly or have already opened. Our current turnover rate's 15.9% across the organisation, on average, higher in some areas, lower in others. A marginal increase over September's turnover, which was 15.8. We measure employee engagement 4 times a year. The overall engagement score is 7.6, down 0.1 since the last survey. Finally, let me turn to financial and service performance. From a financial point of view, capital expenditure for the quarter, July to September, was 79 million against a budget of 102. Direct revenue 197 million against a budget of 194, so a $3 million favourable variance. Direct operating expenditure of 414 million, 16 million below budget of 431, again a favourable variance. Savings towards the Council's $90 million savings target for this year is currently 57 million. We still have 33 million of savings in this year to identify and deliver. We will focus more on service performance in the Q1 performance report. A range of other performance areas of note, building and resource consents, often of interest. There were 1,573 building consents lodged in October, which is a 3% reduction on September, so flattening of building consents. Similarly, with resource consents, there were 1,399 resource consents lodged in October, 1% less than September. Flattening, but not yet dropping off. Also of note, I think, a 9% increase in food licences lodged, 148 of them, 23% increase in noise control requests. There were 4,507 requests received in October, a significant increase over September, about 1,000 more. I'll leave it at that, I think, and hand over to Peter for a more detailed update on financials.
Thank you, Jim. Jim's covered off in paragraph 4 some of the results for Auckland Council. I'll just briefly go through paragraph 3, some of the results for the group. I would like to, as a general overall comment, just talk about the results in general. There's some ups and downs, but there's not too much at this stage that is of context that would change the outlook for the year, and it doesn't change the context that we face for the next budget year. That context will be discussed more when I talk to the monetary policy statement implications for us later on. So with regard to paragraph 3, capital investment was an underspend of 153, driven by labour and material shortages, but there's an expectation that that will be addressed or mitigated throughout the remainder of the year. Direct revenue was higher by 2%. Direct operating expenditure was higher by less than 1%. Those two items work a lot in tandem with grants from Waka Kotahi for the half price fares coming through and the costs coming through in those items, and similarly the costs from MB and the revenue from MB for the support on Tamaki Regenerate. But there's an underlying weakness on fee and user charges, which is hidden within those results. Net debt, 371 million increase to 11.5 billion, with the year-end budget being 12 billion at this point. So those are some of the highlights on the performance reporting. If I head to paragraph 5, paragraph 5 talks to the performance reports that are attached to this. They are a monthly report as at the end of October, whereas the quarterly reports are September, and those performance reports are going to be provided to the governing body every month, and between those more fulsome quarterly performance reports. Also worth noting that the AT performance will be going to the Transport Committee on 1 December, and the CCOs will be reporting to a committee on the 5th as well. So there's an opportunity for more analysis of performance at those committees, as opposed to the overall group position at this one. If I turn to paragraph 6, for returning councillors, this will be old news, but each quarter the governing body will be provided with an update on the financial and non-financial performance. We will look to evolve the way in which we've been doing that, given that there will be a monthly financial performance coming to governing body, so there may be more of a focus on the non-financial performance at those quarterly sessions. It will include progress updates on our strategic focus areas, key programs of work, people and performance risks and mitigations. Also included long-term plan performance measures, operating performance, capital performance and treasury updates. And that will be coming to the 15th December meeting of this body. They would generally be on a faster cadence than that. However, election inauguration has precluded that being able to be coming along any earlier. All right. Paragraph 7, the economic and market update. It has been foreshadowed that this might not be great news, and that would be correct. The key economic market update covers the annual inflation rate. Until last night, the consumer price index at 7.2%, well, actually that still stays at 7.2%, and we won't get another update until 25 January, and we should watch that result carefully. But MPS, the monetary policy statement from the RBNZ yesterday afternoon, gave us a view on that, what I'll talk to in bullet point 5. Unemployment rate 3.3%. This indicates whether tightening is working, and at this stage suggests, as RBNZ did last night, that we're at over full employment. GDP, as at the end of June, 1.7%. Dwelling consented numbers, 21,985. That's 11% higher than the year ended September 21. So there is some aspects in that are a wee bit counterintuitive. Debt issuance for October 22. We got a Swiss francs green bond away in October. Given this was open for people to invest in at the same time that the UK pound was melting down, we were very pleased to have got that away. We were pleased to get the capacity and the interest in the market. Okay, under item 6, the OCR and monetary policy statement, I can confirm that our interest in this was warranted, and I'll give you a bit of an update on that now. So since yesterday afternoon, we have been assessing the impact of that monetary policy statement. It was not a surprise that the RBNZ increased the OCR by 75 basis points. That was what a majority of banks and investors and forecasters had predicted. However, the messaging around a required increase through to an OCR rate of 5.5% in the third quarter of 2023 was higher than markets had expected. This has resulted in initial increases in the underlying cost of capital in the order of 26 to 15 basis points across a range of 2 to 10 years. It has risen more in the short term, so the impact is more in the short term than the long term. And that obviously has an impact on our cost of debts, one of the sensitivities we called out when we were doing our financial projections. Now, an implication of this is that releasing capital is of greater benefit as it avoids those high interest costs in the short term. In addition, the inflation forecast from RBNZ was also notably higher than what was included in their August monetary policy statement and consequently our October projections. Inflation for December this year, which drives our underlying workforce cost increases, are now projected to be 1% higher than in our October projections at around 7.5%. Now, it is difficult to be precise given the time frame we've had to assess this and the continuing uncertainty in this space. However, our best estimate at this stage is that across impacts on our cost of borrowing, workforce costs, and also the requirement to support our large index contracts, we will face around an additional 25 million of costs. So this therefore increases our operating challenge in FY24 from an estimate of 270 million to around 295 million. Now, obviously, this is not welcome news. However, we are well progressed around discussions on the FY24 budget, and the same levers remain available to Council for addressing this challenge, namely service and OPEX reductions, CAPEX phasing, revenue increases, asset sales, and the prudent use of debt. In my opinion, this news reinforces the importance of ensuring we achieve a credible and sustainable budget for the next financial year and beyond. And I can confirm and commit that staff will continue to provide advice to inform the decision that the Mayor and elected members have to make. So that's the update. With those decisions that face you in mind, paragraph 8 covers the process from here to achieve an annual budget. It has the public release of a mayoral proposal setting out items for consultation. Local boards will have the opportunity to provide input, and then governing body meets on 15 December, which is 3 weeks and a bit, to agree items to take forward to public consultation. If decisions relate to the consideration of options that require an LTP amendment, an external audit will be required and will need to be supported by a detailed statement of proposal. That sounds quite boring and legalistic, but it does impact severely upon our time frame, which is why I'm bringing it to your attention. Final budget decisions are obviously made following public consultation and prior to adoption of the final budget by 30 June. So that's a quick update on MPS from 2 o'clock yesterday. I'll now pass you across to Phil Wilson to give you an update on CCOs.
I'm just going to pause, Your Worship, in case you wanted to discuss any of those aspects before. Some of what I'm going to talk to is slightly administrative in terms of the CCO reporting.
Thank you for that. In that case, I'll take Councillor Sayers' question now, and Councillor Darby's as well, and then we'll refer to you, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you, Worship, and thank you, Peter, for the report and the update. I don't really want to make any comment, but the question really is around, and I was going to wait till after the CCOs, Phil, but it's around the City Rail Link Limited. We don't report on that as part of this agenda, and I'm just looking at the recommendations because I find it quite difficult to weigh up looking at our financial situation, through this report, and then also knowing that there's a big debt question coming up around CRL and operational costs on top of that. And I just wondered if there's the wisdom around presenting both of those at the same time rather than having them staggered. So I guess the question is around our ability, Mr. Mayor, if it's helpful to my colleagues, to have that update from CRL Limited included as part of this regular report, as part of this agenda item, or does it remain separated for those reasons, particularly with
Quite a good question, but in fact, I don't think the CRL is in a position to actually give us that. So what your question really is when will there be good news?
Well, any update on the figures around debt, but more importantly, Mr. Mayor, the operational costs, we have no idea. We've always been told that we'll have an idea about how much the City Rail Link will cost, and I'm thinking about budgets going forward now. When that opens, it's a bit late. We should have a ballpark if we have the budget for opening in 2025 of that system.
If I talk to CRL on its inclusion within the finances currently and within next year's budget, the implications for both those terms are really around the equity injection that we make from our capital base towards the project. As we get more information around the outturn position for CRL, then we will be able to include that. And also, as we get more information around the ownership structure of a number of those assets, we'll be able to update on the operational implications in the out years. However, it's not a performance issue other than regarding the capital that we invest into that entity over the next year and a half, which is the focus of this performance report and the annual budget.
Councillor Darby.
A quick one, thanks, Mayor. Going back to the Chief Executive's commentary earlier, just in terms of staff members, is there a hiring freeze blanket at the moment? And if so, when was that put in place? Or is it in some parts of the organisation? Is it blanket or is it specific? And do we have an account of what the current vacancy rate is within the council?
Thanks, Councillor. There isn't an absolute freeze. There is a hiring restriction that's been put in place, that was put in place in October. The reason for that is because, with 15% churn across a workforce of 7,000 people, there's a, very big sort of machine that has to operate to ensure that frontline roles are appropriately staffed. And so frontline customer-facing roles, where there is a vacancy that requires replacement, we are replacing frontline customer-facing roles. The restrictions are in place on any roles that are not customer-facing frontline roles, and they are receiving much higher levels of scrutiny. As a consequence, we're currently a few hundred under our FTE profile, but part of that will be a function of the churn that we're constantly kind of responding to.
Okay, probably look into that one later on rather than now. And the second one to you, Peter, you've outlined, yesterday's decision from the Reserve Bank with the OCR going up 75 points. I read that there is a strong signal that there's an additional 50 basis points in the new year, which would be before our absolute budget confirmation. Now, I'm not sure where that's coming from. Is it just economists speculating, or is it being signalled by the Reserve Bank? And if so, do we need to be weary of another 20 million on top of the 295?
Thank you for the question, and I'll try and clarify. The most important aspect of the Reserve Bank announcement yesterday for us was the indication that the rate that they thought they needed to go to was 5.5%. By the third quarter of FY23, calendar year, next year, 2023. And that was what drove up the interest rates. There was an expectation of 75 basis points this time. There's another expectation from most market analysts of 75 basis points increase early in the new year as well. Those items by themselves will not change our forward average cost of funds. What will is if in that space they do not perceive that their tightening is having the impact that they are looking for, which is effectively a slight recession. If they are not getting the impact that they desire from the OCR tightening, they have signalled that they will continue to tighten. And it is those types of longer run implications which would impact on our cost of debt. However, it's more the terminal rate and how far they have to keep tight for that will impact upon our cost of debt and the market position. I don't have a crystal ball. I was asked last time whether I thought 270 was it. I still don't have a crystal ball. We're all in this situation of having to wait and see whether the interventions work and how quickly they work.
One last quick one, and that is, if the Three Waters legislation progresses and it becomes law, and the the water care debt is transferred and I guess part of the Healthy Waters debt is transferred. I asked this in a workshop, and I don't think it's sensitive. We couldn't put a figure on what sort of debt headroom that we might obtain out of that. And I'm just wondering, it just did surprise me that we couldn't actually identify what is likely to be transferred. I thought Watercare would know exactly, you know, how much debt on their books, on our common books, could be transferred. Can we get an update? Can somebody do some work to find out what what the level of debt is that would be transferred, that would give us some headroom?
We do have a very good handle, through you, Chair, on the level of debt within Watercare. The more problematic aspect is the definition of the assets that fall within the other water and which ones of those would transfer across to that water services entity. Associated with that is the decisions on assets, liabilities, revenues and costs and what would transfer. And it's only when all of those are worked through that you have an indication of what that does to your debt to revenue ratio. So we have a large portion of it, but there's very important aspects alongside it that we don't have clarity on enough to be able to make a determination. And that's both the case for us internally and credit rating agencies externally.
Look, apology then, because it might have sounded like I was criticising you, but the complexity is in the healthy waters side and understanding, you know, what the values are in that area. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, and also what the values of the asset redistribution is and what that does on our debt to asset ratio. So there's a lot of questions there, and you'll do well to keep asking until we do get some answers. Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. And just acknowledging, I've sent a whole lot of small questions through to Peter and the team, which I don't expect answers to until next week. So, but I do have two questions I wanted to ask now. The first one is in relation to the unemployment rate. Is it more useful for us to consider the Auckland unemployment rate as opposed to the national one? Are there cases where, you know, the Auckland stats are significantly different from the national in a way that we should be considering differently? And then I've got one more question after that, please, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Chair, you're bridging me into areas of fiscal policy, which I'm not really able to answer in a great sense. My feel on unemployment rate as an average is it undercalls a dispersion across various demographic and social groups. The main impact of that is not regional because it is the driver that the Reserve Bank is looking for in terms of its impact on whether they need to keep tightening. They have previously estimated the natural, the non-accelerating employment rate is 5%. So if you have an unemployment rate of 5%, it's not impacting on inflation. So until they see the unemployment rate increasing from 3.3% towards that 5%, they're still concerned about whether they've tightened enough. That would be about as far as I'd like to bridge into fiscal policy on behalf of the RBNZ.
Thank you. Then my other question, so a lot of what's, and this may be a little bit more in the CCO or operational space, but let's see. A lot of the financial disruptions that are recorded in the report, reading the commentaries, there's a lot of mention around the delay to materials, labour shortages. Is this a new normal though? Because that's one of the things I worry about is that we think, oh, well, actually this is just a short-term thing and sooner or later those labour and material shortages will sort of sort themselves out. But they've been going on a few years now, and it seems to me that some of this is actually baked into the system. It's not just COVID impacts, particularly as we see the impact of climate change and you know, we're very reliant on goods coming by sea. So, yeah, what was sort of the thinking there, and are we doing any sort of medium-term planning around whether these are becoming medium to long-term to permanent issues that are impacting on the finances? Thank you.
Thank you again for a very excellent question, Councillor Ferry. Again, the crystal ball is very difficult to unpack the degree to which the labour force issues are endemic now or medium or short term. The degree to which the capital program can address them is through early contractor involvement, less reliance on labour, using contractors earlier before permanent, and encouraging policy changes to mean that the immigration border becomes more permeable. It is fair to say that we have had the same impact for 2 or 3 years now. It does seem to me that it is likely to remain the case until that unemployment rate starts to move as well.
Thank you.
Do we measure inventory levels, because that's a good indicator of whether or not the shortage of materials will disappear quite quickly? From my experience and observation, is inventory levels are dropping, and so that I think that this will shorten up and that problem will disappear. But Angela Dalton and Councillor Dalton, next please.
Thank you. There's been some excellent questions, Peter, and I wonder if we can hold them as we move forward, because some of them are repetitive around the OPEX and outgoing years for the CRL, the debt that we don't know about yet. But I wonder if it helps to just agenda them somewhere so they are there, and even the questions that Councillor Ferry has just asked as well. Excuse me, and Councillor Darby around the movement of the debt should Three Waters go through. It would certainly be helpful for me if I knew that they were somewhere in an agenda as we proceed through our discussions for not just this annual plan but the long-term plan. My question is this. So the Reserve Bank Governor has recommended that we hold on spending. You've said that the levers are still really relevant for us as we move forward with the decision making. Do you think that we should be pulling the reduction in debt level a little bit harder? Do you think your advice might change around that as we proceed through absolutely not spending, as we move through the budget? And additionally, should we be having more of a focus on those non-service asset sales to reduce our debt? But what then is the timing of that? Is the timing enough to see us through, because those asset sales get stalled for various reasons along the way?
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. A number of great questions. The items that you mentioned are generally well encapsulated within the annual report as key assumptions, key areas that Audit Office flags as well. So we do have to keep a very close eye on them and make sure that we manage them through as we become available, as the information on them becomes available. But a very good point. In terms of a debt reduction and the balance sheet, I would agree that the extent to which you can improve the situation by avoiding interest costs, where you have items within the balance sheet that you can remove from the debt position, that will certainly help, and it will help more now in a high interest environment than it will later. Effectively, it means that you're not having to borrow when you are investing. You won't have to borrow currently at high interest rates. You can delay that for a period. So there is some real advantage in that. The mix of levers is, of course, up to council and elected members. But my advice would be it's become a more important lever, that one now, and a more impactful one. In terms of the timing of process for other ones, yes, the implementation ability and the execution of these asset recycling targets, the ones that you can do quickly will have the greatest benefit.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
No question.
Councillor Baker.
Probably I'll let you off the hook, Peter. Probably a question for the Mayor in terms of when do we intend to, or are we intending to bring local boards into the conversation in regards to the annual plan, or are we going back to the old days where we will decide and just tell them this is what it is? And because I know they'll be getting their own information, but when are we going to see them around the table here so they have a better understanding of what the situation is?
Does that require an answer, or? You okay with that? Councillor Baker? Yeah.
Are we bringing the local board chairs into a workshop? And I haven't seen or heard anything about that. We had Team Auckland, it seems to be a 7-a-side team now as opposed to a 15. So, are we going to bring them into the discussion, or are we're leaving them on the outside?
Through your worship. I can't give you the detail, Councillor Baker, but there have been discussions about how and when to bring local boards in. There is definitely an intention to do so, and I think that'll be clarified shortly.
And just to add to that, they have been briefed once and they're being briefed again on Monday. Yes.
Councillor Williamson?
Just a quick comment with regards to the OCR this morning and so on. I've never heard a more frank interview with the Reserve Bank Governor, and my knowledge goes back to Spencer Russell back in the mid-80s. On Radio New Zealand this morning, and I would counsel everyone up here to listen to it. He was very, very blunt. He said recession is necessary. Tighten your belts and prepare for a recession. He said the 75 basis points that took us to 4.25 is only just a move in the right direction, and he had to make it that big because he couldn't move again till February. But it was quite clear, he says, after raising it to 4.5, be ready for more increases next year. We're looking to lift the OCR to at least 5.5, so that's quite a significant on the 4.25. You need to be prepared to expect mortgage rates of 8% next year. I've never heard a Reserve Bank Governor be that bold in an interview before. They're really normally very circumspect, say we've got to look at the issues, we've got to think about what happens, and in February we'll be. So if everybody here is interested in it, go to Radio New Zealand, have a listen to the podcast of it. It was pretty blood-curdling.
Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I did have a question on Andy's point as well, but I guess that is covered. I think the local boards need to be in the tent and understand the dire nature of things. Things are not business as usual. I think this may even be harder than our emergency budget during the middle of lockdown. My question, the Reserve Bank Governor watched that all yesterday. He did mention that there is a continual competition for people, for staff, salary and wage hikes are obviously driving part of the inflation story, but the issue is for us, we have a threefold situation happening where we are holding recruitment, holding costs, but we already lose many staff to, say, Kāinga Ora, Wokukutahi, government and then the private sector because they can pay higher than us. What is that kind of pressure? How are we dealing with that pressure of that wage competition out there when we can't compete or unlikely can compete that the private sector are right now? Is that an issue that we're thinking about?
Yes, thanks, Councillor. That's an issue we're always considering, and we always have to balance our demand for resources, targeting the right skill sets, paying, or having an employee value proposition that includes salary that's attractive enough to attract the right people. And of course, we are competing in a market, at the moment with low unemployment and high competition for the right resources. So that's the reality of the situation we are in, and we plan our budgets accordingly, right? So the plan that we have in place, against which we have to find ways of closing the gap, does incorporate our ability to continue to staff and continue to pay the people that do the jobs that are essential for the delivery of services for Aucklanders, and that's a balance we just have to continue to make.
And is there thinking, I mentioned the other day in the workshop around the fact that we are in some cases giving quite hefty discounts on consenting because we cannot obtain the skilled staff to complete those in time. Are we looking at ways to have recruitment open where there's also a revenue gain at the same time? Because at the moment it seems like staff is actually losing, a lack of staff in one area is losing us potentially millions of dollars because of consent discounts.
Yeah, I mean, consenting is a specific use case within our overall employee, makeup. And you're right, we largely recover the cost of our consenting effort. And so we deal with that slightly differently. Our service performance is improving there, so as it improves, the requirement on us to refund customers in accordance with our ability to either meet the service level or not reduces, so that's positive. So that's dealt with as a specific case, and we try and manage the balance between resources and demand, noting, of course, that we think demand is starting to flatten and will reduce.
Thank you.
Will reduce very quickly, I should say. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. At a general level, what's the size of Auckland Council's group spend in relation to the Auckland economy as a whole? So if we slowed down our capital investments or our operational spending, do we need to be concerned about the impact of Auckland's GDP on that?
I don't have the ability to answer that, I'm afraid.
It's kind of a balanced question, that, because we also have a demand on the Auckland economy through rates, so kind of like the good question, but it's balanced. Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thank you, Peter. Look, we got quite a lot of bad media press a year ago over our hedging. The Herald particularly was a bit cruel on us with regards to positioning ourselves. Would you like to just update us in public about where we are now as a result of actually what we did regarding hedging? Thank you.
I would love to. Let me just find something I prepared earlier. Due to a prompt from a FAQ in the Herald, actually. So in broad terms, we can say that as interest rates have risen, we've recorded, and they are non-cash, they're only accounting gains, so they don't actually help us out of any situation, but they do reflect the fact that we're not having to pay these amounts. We had a gain of 1.1 billion in the last financial year because of our interest rate hedges. So that was a protection element that came in there. And even since, even at the end of the most recent financial year, the cumulative result over the entire time that we've had hedging in place has been 154 million. We obviously don't hedge for gains, we hedge for certainty, and so that we have the long term covered off and we have certainty around it. But it's fair to say that a $1.1 billion gain over that period, because we were hedged, has proved pretty useful.
Thank you. It's a big number, and I just hope everyone heard it clearly in the back. Thank you.
There's probably a comment on the financial skill sets of those that write about that. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Peter. Look, I agree with the use of monetary policy coupled with fiscal policy to choke off inflationary pressure. But with CPI now north of 7%, and obviously the impact of energy prices and the war in Ukraine, this is going to take, it feels to me like using monetary policy with the OCR way high will take quite some years, and therefore any long-term hedging with fixed rates over the long term, the benefit of that will probably be ground down because the OCR will be so high for so long. So I guess for me, I'm wondering how
how hard can we go immediately with respect to the OPEX savings that need to be achieved in order to really reduce the pressure on our debt position? We can talk about the other levers here, but those other levers don't work unless we effectively gear our way out of our expensive operating activities permanently, and it seems to be quite quickly. My concern is that as we go into this budget setting round, we tiptoe up to that lever rather than actually pulling it really hard, because we're concerned about our commitments across the activities, areas that might not necessarily be that relevant to our financial position, but may, for example, be more in line with what we would like to achieve in areas such as climate. So I want to know how quickly do we have to pull, and how hard do we have to pull, and how hard can we get away with in pulling on that OPEX line OPEX lever in order to try and reduce some of the pressure on that budget.
Thank you, Councillor. That's not a question that's easy to answer quickly or simplistically, because there are many different elements to that question. The way in which I'll attempt to answer it is to discuss the cost base in general terms. So in general terms, almost the entire cost base increases through inflationary pressures. However, the ability to reduce costs is much more limited. There are a few addressable costs that you can actually have a meaningful impact on. So interest, depreciation, water care, Ports of Auckland, regulated services, targeted rates areas are all ones, even if you did pull the OPEX lever or someone else pulled the OPEX lever, they don't have a benefit for the ratepayer, other than perhaps in a user charges sense. In addition, the OPEX savings that you might make in one area, they'll need to be ongoing if they're going to be impactful, or they reoccur the next year. And they also don't tend to accumulate over time. So the OPEX lever is a necessary one. However, it's not going to be a silver bullet. The size of the addressable spend that could be pulled back is not large enough to be a silver bullet in this space. However, as has been mentioned a number of times through a number of public and workshops, the mix of levers and having options open is the way that needs to be addressed. It needs to be taken on to address the budget and operating surplus issue. That was the case at 270. It remains the case at 295.
Even more so, Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Peter. So I guess really the story is of the hedging. The figure we were getting derided for has been largely balanced by matters that have overseen in the previous coverage in the Herald. We're now in a position where we're sort of probably balanced out actually in terms of what may have been lost by not hedging, but certainly depending on how long this current climate lasts, we're on the right side of the ledger now. Just in terms of the publicity around this, and following on from Councillor Simpson, people are going to, next year there's a large number of mortgages that have to be renegotiated, and there's concern over that the Mayor's brought up. In terms of our hedging, I think we've got about 80 or 85% of our loans are hedged. Do we have any negotiations that come up that are comparable to what people are going to face potentially with their own mortgages in the near future?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Watson. Another great question. We're currently thinking that most mortgage holders will feel the effects of high interest rates over the next 12 months, about 58%. about 11% floating, 47 fixed for 1 year or less. When we look at our own debt, we're 80% hedged at the moment, but you are correct. As we move forward, we are less hedged into the future, and we have refinancing and new debt that we need to take on to support greater investment and growth. So we do face a greater impact from inflation over that period, which is also going back to Councillor Dalton's question around the impact of capital release now that reduces our need to borrow for the next few years, because to the extent that we can do that, we avoid those short interest costs at the moment as we come out of hedging.
Thank you for that. I think just before we go forward to the CCO part, I'll make one little statement about what's really clear today is the monthly reporting of financial positions is an important task and an important thing that I want people to get used to. The more you see these things, the more we'll get a feel for them. Anyone who has a little trouble following all those things, you're welcome to have a chat with us. I want everyone to feel comfortable so you get a feel for this. They're not just bland pages of Chinese numbers. They are telling a story. Within those stories, the next thing, under the group one, if we could have the group separating out bus, or even our own ones, Auckland Transport, if we could separate out under other direct expenditure, which is largely going to be the contracts. You know, buses, ferries and trains would be interesting to see, so that we can get a little bit of granularity without getting too far into it. And you'll get comfortable as you start reading these things. You kind of, things jump out at you. You know, I look at this and I see, God, Tautaki Auckland has 14% of the staff that the whole council does. That strikes me as quite something that I'd think, holy something. So it's just, this regular reporting I think is an excellent thing, not quarterly. And just, I want you to get comfortable with everybody, look at it. If you've got any questions about that you want to have in terms of understanding, I either ask Peter and his team or have a chat to me. Before we go to you, CCO, I think noticed everyone's traipsing out to the loo, so we're going to have a 10-minute plumbing break, with the exception of Councillor. You've got two you want to ask right now, and then we'll have a plumbing break.
Very quick, I promise.
Okay.
It's actually just more again a point of information based on what Councillor Henderson's question was. From latest Infometrics, Auckland's GDP is about 122 billion, and New Zealand's GDP is about 326. We're currently sitting at about 37% of the whole country is based here in Auckland for GDP. And it's an amazing increase. If you go back 20 years to 2001, we were under 34% of it. We're now 37.8. So Auckland's GDP percentage of the whole country is continuously increasing.
Councillor Lee, quick one, and then we go into the loo.
It's just a quick comment, Mr Mayor. The remarks from Mr Gudsall in regard to the limitations of how much this body can economise concern me a little bit. This is an organisation over $250 million in debt, and with a turnover of $5 billion. I really do think, given those comments, that we really do need an independent view on our situation. I think we desperately need it. Thank you.
I'm just going to give us 10 minutes break, please.